Hey guys, welcome back here today. Today I'm going to talk about this theory I've had ongoing. It's going to be probably a little longer video than I normally post. A long time ago, I had a conversation with the late James Yeager, who's one of my big mentors, and he didn't fully agree with me at all, really. But I've always thought of training and how we progress in training as dimensions, and I can correlate it pretty simple. And examples, okay? But so just kind of bear with me as I go through this. James had a contradictory thought. He always saw it as linear, as steps, like step 1, step 2, step 3, and like we progress. And I agree that those were built into each dimension of training. Now, I'm not going to draw this big old thing on the board, but within dimensions, if you could think of it as more of a sphere, not like a weird circle on the Venn diagram, whatever they are, think of them as more like spheres because they're all interconnected, and like it makes sense. Like if I could explain to you like sleep factors into health filters into fitness filters into how we can perform physically during fighting and living and blah 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 blah. So in its own way, it's like the butterfly effect. Anyways, let's boil it back down to dimensions of training. So as an example, I list base level 1 or dimension 1 is essentially like we're a speck of dust, right? We're still in basic skill, limited thoughts, limited theories. We don't even really know what training is. An example of this is like someone who decides to go out and buy a gun because they say, hey, I want to have a gun for self-defense or maybe concealed carry or something like that. Okay, cool. So, and it correlates to how they think and what kind of guns they buy and what targets they even shoot at. An example I'll give you is we'll probably start off with that gun plinking at tin cans or shooting at like circle targets, bullseye targets. But in our mind, we're preparing ourselves for self-defense. And I feel like that's kind of how my progression went through to a point because like my pops was like, hey, you know, he was a hunter, he taught me how to hunt. And I just thought like hunting and self-defense were pretty the same because it involves shooting. But then you realize like, hey, that basic skill of shooting and hunting is not exactly the same as in self-defense. I can't just be over here plinking at tin cans and circles that target-wise, visually don't even correlate to the targets I'm preparing to fight and or kill. So kind of keep that in mind as we look at it too limited of a scope. And I think to a point, our tools and our practice habits kind of reflect that. So that would be a point right there. Another example is like we're not thinking about movement, we're not thinking about tactics, we're not thinking about all the overlaying things that we need to also factor in for very specific circumstances, like the 5 P's and the 5 R's. So when you look at that, you know, anything beyond this, if you're so closed-minded, you're stuck here. You're stuck in that one dimension, believing that buying a gun prepares you for self-defense. And unfortunately, that is about 99% of folks who are out there. They buy a gun, they think the law is more important, and having a little certificate or card is all they're going to need, and that's base level skill. And I think that's horrible. It's a horrible thought. What we must progress to some point is to be exposed, where we must understand the difference between experience versus knowledge. And this kind of goes into both training for our specific events and a survival proficiency of it. Survival proficiency. So James always said you needed to have a survival proficiency level of skill, meaning do you have enough skill in order to have some basic ability to defend yourself if you're talking about training and self-defense. So if we're looking at that, you have to get beyond this point right here, and you have to have some exposure through training if you don't have real-time experience. That exposure builds knowledge, right? So knowledge, unfortunately, is this big old word that conceptualizes and conceives and compiles of other people's knowledge usually, but not necessarily personal experience. You know, again, I'm going to quote James, but like he said, you know, at one time, like, I hate people who've been in one gunfight because they think every gunfight is exactly like that one. He said he'd rather have a dude who was in zero gunfights because their mind is open, and by the time they get to this level, their training, everything is definitely an option. And then by the time they get to maybe, unfortunately, 3 or more gunfights, then they realize, you know what? Fuck, anything could happen. So now they have not just knowledge, but they have that experience built in their brains and understanding like, hey, the world changes. Hey, situations are different. Contexts are different. I have to train accordingly. I have to build that Rolodex in my brain of different scenarios, situations, and altercations to allow me to be successful in the real world, right? Which world are we living in? So reflection of that on a simplistic term is, are you switching targets? Not like literally transitioning targets from 1, 2, 3, but simply going from shooting and clicking at tin cans and shooting bullseyes. Are you actually practicing on a humanoid type target? Are you shooting at 3D type targets? Are you shooting at representations of a face or a person with a gun, even on paper? That's an easy progression in that second dimension. Progressively, and this kind of goes into, are there spaces in between? And I think the answer is yes, like 1.5 dimensions, 2.5 dimensions, and I failed to mention the 1.5 because you don't really know. But an example could be, I don't move in basic stuff, but by the time I get to 2-dimensional training, I'm starting some basic lateral movement, like maybe sidestepping. I may give verbal commands. I'm integrating other small concepts within said training. And when we get to like 2.5 dimensions, like kind of bridging more than the second dimension, while we're doing verbal commands, movement, basic movement, am I also starting to integrate a different dimension of training and testing it like through force on force? If it's live fire only, this is where I tell people 360 ranges are super important. Are you switching targets and not just engaging targets in front of you, but to your left, to your right, and possibly even behind you? Are you scanning, looking around, moving around targets, eyeballs and everything, high, low, close, far? Because the real world is 360 degrees. It's not just one target I stapled up here or some coach tells me to shoot or tells me to burn 6 rounds into in sub 2s. That is so one-dimensional, 1.5 dimensional skill building at best that it's not preparing you for the fight, for the real world, for real altercations, and it's misleading. Shot timer drills do not go beyond level 1, 1.5, okay, period. If you're doing some shot timer drills in long competitions, you're just barely entering the second dimension of training because it doesn't incorporate other real people. You run as a sole individual, running a stage that you probably walk through, etc., etc. Targets don't get to shoot back. The range will never be 360 because a 180 rule already pre-exists. So I don't think competition shooting goes beyond, if barely touches, the second dimension of training. One big one on 2.5 dimensions of training in live fire is downrange drills. If you're not doing downrange drills, you're wrong, okay, period. It is the highest level of training, live fire training you could possibly get because there's real consequence through training, but the training environment allows repeatability. It allows you to do so repeatably and as safely as possible and as controlled as possible, even though it could be entirely a dangerous drill because I have a dude downrange. There's not a whole lot of schools that do downrange type training, but the ones who do, thank you very much, because that is super critical. It is critical to build mindset, to build skills, to build confidence, to build coolness under stress and pressure, because there is real consequence. We pulled as many safety blocks as possible away from there. Force on force is just a test bed. This is not a linear progression. This is more like 3D chess. You may take one path here and go force on force, right? And then you may go this one and do downrange 360. And then you may progressively go this route and then go hand-to-hand stuff. Okay? So that's what I mean by inner dimensions. I'll talk about that on this fourth one right here. So next we go to the third dimensional training. To get true three-dimensional training, it's got to be real time, which means it's a real event. The problems with that is, well, the positives is it leads to experience. And I talked about the pros and the cons. The bad things about it is there are permanent consequences and repercussions. Poor decisions, poor actions, all those things can lead to bad outcomes. And training by definition is allowing us to repeat it, quote unquote, safely. But real time, unfortunately, does not allow that. Life is not safe, okay, guys? You have one go at it, period. You have one go. So how does that factor in? Well, you have to survive this, okay? That's the problem with three-dimensional training. When you hit that third level, that experience, you have to survive it in one piece in order for you to share it. And that kind of goes into 3.5 dimensions. If I do after action reports, I do a debrief, and now I can share that training, that experience. It builds into the knowledge base. It builds into other people's experiences. I can build other shooters, other fighters, warriors, whatever word you want to put to it. But you really have to focus on that real time and experience does factor in. That is the test for all of this. I tell people this like when I give permit classes all the time. Everybody's worried about the shooting test. Everybody's worried about the written test. And I say, hey guys, that's not the test you need to worry about. The real test is out there, okay? And you'll get one go at it, maybe two, because you only live once and you usually only die once. So remember that counts as training. And everything that you've done before that will factor in how you perform. But just remember, you can do everything right and still lose. Okay, that's what we call luck. Sometimes you just have bad luck. Good training is supposed to build that luck in your favor. Kind of over here, interdimensional training. It's not like a space Star Wars kind of fantasy thought. If you think about it, right, one dimension, X, Y, Z kind of axes, and then there's like the thought of having time. And I do think it kind of factors in here because interdimensional training thought does factor for us time. We only have a limited amount of time to be training and doing stuff, living our life. We have a finite amount of time on this earth to do these things. This is where we start connecting these bridges. Am I training force on force? Am I doing 360 live fire? Am I doing hand-to-hand combatives like Craig Douglas's ShivWorks, Cecil Birch, Frank Sharp, all those guys? Other training, are we doing medical? Are we living a healthy lifestyle? Are we trying to be good people? Do we find Jesus, right? All these other things spiritually. Do we have a lawyer? All this kind of training all interconnects. And that's what I'm getting to so they're more like spheres that do this and they link up at some point, okay? That if you're stuck here at level one dimensions of training, like your brain and your eyes are so limited, you might as well be in condition white for the rest of your life. And unfortunately, we know people like that. So build that level 2, get to that 2.5, train hard, prepare yourself, and then go over here and continuously ask yourself, right? If I do wind up with experience, hopefully you survive, how do I help others? Okay, and just keep that going. Anyways, that's kind of my thoughts on the 3 dimensions of training, guys. I won't say I invented it, but I have never heard really many people who talk about it, if ever. I'm the only guy I can think of in the last 15 years who's been thinking about that. So tell me what you think.